welcome everyone. I'm very much looking forward to hearing from today's speaker, Jim Santelle, whom I would like to introduce. Mike Gousha requires no introduction. Jim Santelle is a Marquetteer, having received his undergraduate degree in political science. Did I get that right from the university's database?
English history and political science kind of off to the side, yes.
In the humanities and the social sciences.
There you go.
In 1980, he then received his law degree from the University of Chicago in 1983, but the Marquette spirit, I hope it's not too much to say, has remained with him ever since, as evidenced by his extensive volunteer work over the past several decades, in particular as a member of the volunteer staff of the American Legion's Boys Badger State Program, which is a high school program with which many of you are no doubt familiar. That does not pay the bills or pay the rent, though, so he has found gainful employment in the legal profession as well. His full-time professional activities since graduating from the University of Chicago Law School in 1983 have all been with the government. After a 2-year clerkship here on the Eastern District of Wisconsin, Mr. Santelle became an assistant United States attorney in this district, and he has been with the United States government ever since. He has held several positions, but it's the two more recent ones that are of the greatest interest. In particular, since February of 2006, Mr. Santelle has been working to build a justice system in Iraq, first as resident legal advisor and today as justice attaché to the United States Embassy in Baghdad. I had the opportunity last week to be at the annual luncheon of the local Federal Bar Association, the Eastern District of Wisconsin Bar Association. I was there in a representative capacity because the Marquette Volunteer Legal Clinic received the Judge John W. Reynolds Community Building Award, and I will show that to you. This is the award that the MVLC received. Mr. Santelle was there in a dual capacity. First, he received the Judge Robert W. Warren Public Service Award. I know that that was an especially meaningful award for him to receive, since it is for Judge Warren that he clerked after law school. Second, he was the keynote speaker. On the one hand, you gave very thoughtful remarks about Iraq. On the other hand, you caused a little bit of a discussion, not to say a civil war, among those there to represent the law school and the MVLC. That's because Mr. Santelle brought 4 lanterns from Baghdad, one for each of his fellow award winners. Imagine my surprise when those who were there with me, the volunteers from the Marquette Volunteer Legal Clinic, made clear that we could keep this at the law school, but the lantern from Baghdad was going with them. I prevailed upon them to let me keep it long enough to get a photograph of it and perhaps use it as a prop, but I will say that they made really a compelling case on the matter. They had to have the lantern, they said, because they believe that when they don't have the answer to a client's question in the future, and they do get so many questions that this happens, they will be able to rub the lantern, and a genie will appear with the answer. So, Jim, even when you are back in Baghdad, you should know that your spirit will be, because I presume that it is you who will be the genie.
Absolutely.
Your spirit will be at 17th and Walnut in Milwaukee, in the House of Peace, every Tuesday from 3 to 7 p.m. We do have something for you as well. I don't know how much time you have to relax or have a drink in Iraq, but these are rather substantial Marquette University Law School coasters. We don't ordinarily give a token of our appreciation, but we would like you to accept them. Please know that these are from me personally, not from the law school, which I think means that you can accept them if I understand the ethics code correctly. But they are from me. I'm not going to find myself prosecuted under 18 U.S.C. Section 1001 for submitting false information to the government. So please join me in welcoming Jim Santelle.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks to all of you again for coming today. I did want to mention something important here, and that is there will be food available after on your way out. Just a slight mix-up on that, but you're welcome to have a bite on the way out today. We would like to welcome Jim Santelle because he is back in town for a short while, and then it's, I believe, off to Iraq again. And I thought let's begin with with why you have made this your mission. Why have you spent most of the last 14 months in Iraq?
Mike, first, thank you very much for having me here today. Dean, I also appreciate your kind remarks. Iraq, obviously, a place today that's in a great deal of tumult, and that is the question that people ask, both personally and professionally. Not only why have you been there, but why the heck are you going back after all the things that we read about in the newspaper on a regular basis? And the simple, if not short answer to the question is that putting aside all the violence and all the challenges that are there, which we will discuss in the next hour or so, you should know that there is a small, and perhaps even more than small, but a significant contingent of judges and other leaders over there who desperately are looking for our help and our assistance. And I can give you their names, and I can describe them to you and what they do. When I left a number of weeks ago, they said to me, "You're coming back, are you not?" And the answer was, "Yes, I am," with some hesitancy. And they said, "No, you are coming back." And the reason for that, of course, is because investing in those people is investing in the future of this country. There are people over there, as I said, who are looking for our assistance, our support, not just monetarily, but also in terms of leadership and direction. And at the risk of sounding very immodest, I think that people like me can provide some of that and to assist them in doing some things that maybe will plant some seeds and hopefully grow down the road into something much better.
Your job, Jim, is to promote and encourage the rule of law in Iraq. But given the current conditions, how difficult is it for you to do that?
The difficulty probably cannot be overstated. Let me give you the best example that I have, and that is that when I head out to meet with the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Mike, on a regular basis, probably once every week or so, I put on a flak jacket, I put on protective earwear and eyewear, and I put on a helmet. And I go out under military escort in Humvees. Every so often a tank will accompany us. And if not that, under a private security detail that is responsible for taking me out there and bringing me back safely. The last time I went to the Ministry of Justice building, about 10 blocks outside of the Green Zone, to meet with the Supreme Court justices and some other folks there, the war came to the building because they knew that we were there, and quite literally we were told that we had to cut the meeting short because they could no longer secure our safety and the safety of the Iraqis who were there. So we were promptly escorted back to the Green Zone under fire, quite literally. I use that as an example of the difficulty of trying to do good things in the midst of what quite literally is a war environment. And if there is one great message that I would convey to you, Mike, and to the others who are here today, it is that tremendous challenge of trying to do these things with this small but very dedicated group of people while there is a war raging outside. It is not easy.
Are you making quantifiable progress? Can you say that?
I think the answer is a very small yes, a small y, a small e, a small s. And again, it partakes of this notion of depositing in the minds and the hearts of a small number of people the sense about due process, about fundamental rights, and we'll get into detainee operations, those kinds of things. And you can see some development in those areas. You can identify some progress in working with a particular criminal court or with a particular prison site or a particular police group. I cannot tell you, quite candidly, that we are changing the world because of those great challenges that are out there. But again, the concept is that by working with individuals and hopefully, I suppose we would call it training the trainers, if you will, that at some point down the road that spreads and that the deposits we're making today will have an impact a year from now, 5 years from now, and generations down the road.
Help all of us understand the Iraqi judicial system, because I think maybe we think that it is just like the American judicial system. You're telling me that's not the case.
Fundamentally different. I often say that when we have reporters or even civilian representatives who show up, they are horrified, frankly, to come into the Central Criminal Court of Iraq, which is a court that we built to handle the terrorist cases and the insurgency prosecutions. They are horrified to see, for example, a 20-minute trial in which there is no questioning of any witnesses, and at the end of that, a three-panel group of judges will impose a 25, 30-year life sentence, death sentence upon someone who is engaged in kidnapping. They're horrified to see that, and we think, my goodness, that is not the situation. In a nutshell, and this is probably the subject of a semester-long course, the civil law system, deposited there under the Napoleonic Code many, many years before we, and frankly even the French and the British were there, contemplates that judges are everything. It is not the cauldron of the adversarial system of a defense attorney and a prosecutor who through this questioning system will get to the truth. Judges investigate cases. Judges hear the witnesses. Judges make decisions about who is going to be called in to testify, who is going to assemble the evidence. They work in many ways the same way that an assistant DA or detective would in our system. And as a result of that, the role of the prosecutor and the defense attorney and others in the court system is quite different and quite minimized from what we would envision as being a truly adversarial system. And so one of the great things that we are trying to bring to that very judge-centric system is a notion of due process to ensure that with a vesting of this great authority and responsibility in judges, you still have a sense of a need to hear cases expeditiously, to ensure that evidentiary concepts, although they are different, are nonetheless observed, and that there is this fundamental sense of right and wrong in terms of procedure and also substance that you do not get if you were simply there looking at it sort of in a snapshot type basis.
You describe a judge-centric system, but my question would be, who would want to be a judge in Iraq right now, given the dangers that exist?
It is profound, and before I answer your question, I will tell you that in the past 3.5 years, almost 4 years, there have been 26 judges assassinated. You can imagine if we had 26 judges in this country, state judges, federal judges, assassinated the last 3 years, including one about a month or so ago who was literally gunned down with his private security details on either side of him as he was waiting at a bus stop. In the brief time that I have been there, which is about 14, 15 months, 9 judges, about 7 of them that I know personally, have been killed. And that is not easy to take, both emotionally and intellectually and professionally. The reason for their being targeted is because the judiciary in Iraq, for all of its faults and for all of its imperfections, still is perceived as an institution that works. And we'll talk more about the ways in which the courts are being used today, appropriately or inappropriately, literally to try terrorist cases, those people who would plant IEDs and blow up bus bombs and things like that. The courts are being used as an institution to prosecute those criminals in that system. Who then would be, as you say, who would be interested in being a judge and putting yourself out there? And the interesting thing is, once again, it goes back to a fundamentally sound and very committed group of people who want desperately to make this work. And so today, there are about 1,000 judges nationwide, Iraqi judges, civil and criminal both, who are handling these very, very tough cases. And in about 2 months, there'll be a group of about 200 judges who are graduating from the Judicial Training Institute in downtown Baghdad. And they will then be assigned to various courts around the country. Believe it or not, there's still a line. There's still a line of people who want to be judges, who want to be a part of this system. Again, reflecting the notion that like all of you probably suspect, Iraqis on a daily basis do want this to work and desperately want to make their country viable.
Those are remarkably courageous people, would you not agree?
Absolutely, absolutely. The Chief Justice himself, our version of John Roberts, lost his son, undeniably assassinated as a signal to him on May 12th last year. 4 days ago, while I was here, I received a report that while the Chief Justice was coming back from the Baghdad airport after having visited Egypt for a while, a car bomb blew up next to him, undeniably targeting him. That is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. They know who he is, incredibly courageous man, and joined by about 999 others who are equally courageous, yes.
Let's talk about the detainee situation in Iraq. Based on some of the documents that you passed along to me, we're talking about as many as 20,000 people by sometime this summer who will be held. Will they all stand trial? How will their cases be adjudicated?
If there is one issue that keeps me up at night, quite literally, it is this issue. It is the prospect of another Abu Ghraib one of these days. And I'll give a little bit of history on it and then tell you what our present status is. And that is that for the past 3.5 years, both our military and the Iraqi military, again, coalition forces, have been apprehending people who are the terrorists, insurgents, militia members, insurgency, all sorts of sources of their violence. And because of this decision that was made after we effectively declared peace and said that we can move on now to create civilization there or recreate a justice system there, the decision was made to send the great majority of those people into the court system and not turn them into prisoners of war. And so over the past 3.5 years, on our side alone, that is the military side, when I refer to our side, I speak about the coalition forces, a wonderful person named General John Gardner, who is retiring actually today, has been responsible for placing at a place called Camp Cropper, which is in Baghdad, another spot called Camp Bucca, which is out in the middle of Basra province, out in the middle of the desert. Somewhere between 10 and 15,000 pretrial detainees waiting to go through this criminal justice system, headed by 1,000 judges and Chief Justice Medhat. An impossible situation, just because the judges aren't sufficiently numerous, the process is not in place structurally to handle that, and yet we're trying desperately to make that happen. What has happened more recently? With the surge, with increases in both Iraqi forces and our MNFI forces, multinational force Iraq forces, even greater numbers of Iraqis are being swept up and apprehended. We can chat about the rightness or lack of rightness, if you will, in some of the ways that is being done. But the reality is that those numbers, already significant, are going to increase. You just mentioned 20,000. John Gardner, if he were here today, would tell you that probably by September, if not before, in this amazing place called Camp Bucca in the south part of the country, there will be somewhere between 20, maybe 25, maybe 30,000 pretrial detainees waiting to be tried in the Iraqi courts because they have been apprehended by Iraqi and MNFI forces. We don't even know how many people are in Iraqi jails and prisons right now also waiting to be tried. But again, the great concern is not only in terms of processing them through a criminal justice system that right now is headed by some very courageous people, but inadequate in terms of numbers and resources. But my great fear, my great concern is simply not having enough physical beds to keep these people in humane housing, keep them fed, keep them well treated. That is a huge, huge challenge, and we can chat more about the ways in which we can respond to that.
The other concern I know for you is interrogation is another issue, because we were talking about this when Jim arrived here today. New York Times did a story on Sunday, and while obviously you're not part of the military, they described the difference in a way American soldiers might get information from detainees as opposed to the way the Iraqi soldiers got information. In the case they described, they beat it out of them,
Absolutely.
essentially. And you mentioned the possibility of another Abu Ghraib. Describe for us your specific concerns about this.
Sure. There are really two things there, and both of them are equally profound in terms of their concern. The issue of beating is no small incident. I would say there's probably not a 2-week period of time when I do not receive a report as the Justice Attaché about someone or some group of people being beaten in some facility. This is the present Iraqi government in some post-conviction facility, some pretrial detention facility, and our answer is always to coordinate judges to get out there to try to address those situations, to get those people processed, to move them as appropriate, to shut down facilities. And I am not sufficiently a student of Iraqi history to tell you how much of that is a part of long-standing precedent. But the reality is that when we instructed a group of about 50 judicial investigators about a month and a half ago, we spent a day talking about the implications of receiving in your investigative file confessions that are prompted by beatings. And what do you do about that? Now that would be 10 minutes here at Marquette University Law School. What the answer is, number one, certainly that confession would be suppressed. It would never see the light of day. There would probably be some sort of Bivens action or other types of action against those jailers. Probably a federal judge or a state judge would be so outraged to dismiss the case, and who knows what else would come of that. In this setting, we are trying desperately to try to impress upon the jailers, the Iraqi Corrections Service officers, and the police the notion that that cannot be a part of your system. And we will work with you and we'll try to address that as best we can in terms of overcrowding issues, but simply beating people to get their confessions cannot continue. That is a part of it. And the other part I just mentioned as well, the overcrowding issue. As we pick up these large numbers of people, the question is, where do we literally physically put them? Your tax dollars right now through John Gardner are building about 6,500 new beds in a place called Rusafa, just on the other side of the Tigris River in Baghdad, to house 6,500 Iraqi detainees as they are going to be apprehended, as they're being apprehended right now. Our question is whether or not we are going to be sufficiently in time to get that done. We think we're going to make it, but that issue also is very, very large. And my concern, again, on a daily basis is to ensure that those Iraqi detainees who may have done bad things, who may be very much appropriately in the criminal justice system, still get the humane treatment and the type of processing that we would envision for a modern corrections service.
A lot of us in this room saw the videotape images of Saddam Hussein's execution, his hanging, and the commotion, the chaos that surrounded that. As someone who is promoting and encouraging the rule of law in Iraq, I'm curious to get your reaction to what occurred.
Right. I suspect that a lot of that, frankly, was hyped up a bit more by the media than because it was a very easily understood thing. That is, you have an individual who was being hung, and the graphic nature of that made it an easy story to understand. And so my own sense of it was it was probably given a little bit more play here than many other much greater concerns that I have about things there in Iraq. Having said that, however, it underscores again the need for us to be there in some sense, and I'm not talking about a continued military presence. I'm talking about civilians, law students, and others at some point down the road, working with Iraqis to establish systems so that the confusion and sort of the mayhem that attended that particular very, very important process does not recur. My own sense of the situation was that it illustrated again the difficulty in working with a system that is brand new. In many ways, not just many ways, in a real way, the Iraqi Corrections Service is 3.5 years old. When Saddam fled to Tikrit, when we came in April of 2003, he opened the doors to the prisons, and 60,000 prisoners fled out into the streets. And everything we're doing today in terms of incarceration and processing of detainees, pretrial and post-conviction, including things as what everyone's feeling is about capital punishment, hangings and the imposition of capital punishment there. This is all new for civilians and non-military people on the Iraqi side. So they're going to be, without in any way apologizing for what happened there, this is part of a training process. The reason why the Department of Justice, which again is responsible for many ways in advising corrections service officers and advising the new developing prison system, is there to ensure that the Saddam confusion and mess and those kinds of things do not happen, including things as simple as ensuring that the death sentence is imposed in a reasonably orderly fashion, if you can bring those two concepts together.
We tend to view what's going on over there through the only prism we know, and that's of people who live in a participatory democracy, a Western democracy. Are we expecting too much from the Iraqis in terms of setting up their judicial system? You describe it. I mean, it's been 3 years. Are we expecting them to just flat out too much from them?
I think we are in some ways. There are, once again, I keep talking about the fundamental group of people who routinely look at me and say, yes, we will do this whenever we suggest things and we make proposals for change. And so they're very willing, very eager to make those changes. But there are times when I need to go back to my office and I think we are pushing not too hard, but our expectations are too high, that the world will change virtually overnight, especially in a system that is so new, and a system that is quite literally on a daily basis facing the horrors of assassinations and prison breaks and beatings in facilities of people who have not been properly trained, creating a new police force, creating a new Iraqi army that again was not in existence 3.5, 4 years ago. You think about our own history in the first parts of our national experience here. A lot of stops and starts, and we were, again, in a post-war period, but still it takes a while for things to fall into place, and so probably our expectations of there being perfect democracy overnight and perfect precision in the ways that we handle all these things are too high.
Do you have a sense of how much time we have to make the kind of progress that I think the people of this country feel needs to be made?
It's a great question. I think about that every night. If I am kept awake at night by the prospect of detainees being in overcrowded prisons, this is the second one that I think about all the time. That is, what is the timetable here? And I recognize it's very good for me to come back also to get a check on the Western media, because it is quite different over there than it is here. My own sense, putting both of them together, and I think General Petraeus would tell you the same thing, General Odierno, who is in charge sort of the MNCI force on a regular basis, will tell you that this surge, the Baghdad security plan as it's known more officially, we probably will get a sense of whether that's really working or not by September or October. Mike and I had talked just before we came here this morning about this notion that every 3 months is a critical period of time. The next year and the next 6 months is commonly referred to as the critical period. I think this really is the next, not just the next, but is truly the critical time for Iraq. And if by the fall of this year there is not a discernible improvement, at a minimum in the capital city, if you cannot preserve peace there and provide some economic stability and some political stability, and just out and out safety, security, electricity, power for the Iraqis in the capital city, if we can't somehow fashion that by the end of this year, I think we've got to do some real introspective looking at what our future there is.
You talked with me earlier about success stories in Iraq, and there's been an amazing amount of construction, and I know that's one of the complaints that you'll hear sometimes from members of the military, that the Western media is not telling you about these success stories. You said there's been an amazing amount of construction over there.
There has been, and again, I don't mean to be overly pessimistic about the future. Frankly, I like to think I'm very balanced about it, and although it's always not a good position to be in to say, well, gee, we built a lot of good things over there physically with bricks and mortar, still, you should know that your tax dollars have gone to support an awful lot of very good things that are up and running. You are building 5 brand new state-of-the-art courthouses, one of which is in Kark, not too far from the embassy, which is going to open probably at the end of next month. State-of-the-art civil and criminal facility. We're beefing up security to ensure that it works. 5 other courthouses in places like Basra to the south, Mosul to the north, Babel, other locations, doing renovations on those kinds of things. You are building, again through your tax dollars, some humane prison facilities. Great challenges in getting that accomplished, again, in a wartime setting when your contractors literally are afraid to show up to work from time to time. But that is happening. You're building clinics, you're building fire stations, things that will in fact improve the basic life support and security for people in Baghdad and other major metropolitan areas around the country. I don't mean to overstate the significance of those, because obviously building a structure does not mean that your country is going to work. But that is a fundamental, a key component of our presence there, which is not just having the Jim Santelles go over and instruct and assist verbally and emotionally and intellectually with these kinds of things, but also saying, and we can deliver to you some safety and security. We're working also on secure judicial housing so that we can get the numbers of judicial assassinations down and can provide some security for these judges who we, as he said, are very courageous and out there. So lots of that going on, and that and other things are the good news stories that we can report on too.
Before we take questions from you, I'd like to ask you one personal question. How does your family feel about you spending 14 months over there and now preparing to go back?
Sure. This is a common experience. You find out about the latest explosions in Baghdad before I do, and I will hear them sometimes literally. And quite literally, in the past couple of weeks, we've had some rockets, as you plainly know, horrifically fall quite literally upon the embassy and about 20 feet from where my office is over there. But you find out about these things before I do, and so it's not uncommon for members of family and friends to call or to send email messages saying, "Are you okay?" And my response will be, "Why? What happened?" And the answer is something horrific that CNN is just reporting on. Taking my tongue out of my cheek a bit more, the answer is they're not happy about things, and I think that's common for virtually everybody who sends a brother, a sister, a son, or a daughter over to serve in the military, and those people really are in harm's way, and that is a source of great concern, legitimate concern for any family. There are civilians who get killed there, and it is one of the reasons why your tax dollars also pay hazard duty pay or danger pay to me, because you are in harm's way. There are an awful lot of people who look at me not only and say, "Gee, with all of these challenges, why are you going back?" But beyond that, "Jim, don't go. This is not a safe and secure environment." It is not, and yet it is one of those things where right now the commitment I think that we have made, again, on the civilian side is sufficiently strong, and we've got enough of our toehold into making some things work that right now to abandon that, or for me to say, "Listen, I'm just not going to go back there," is really not an option.
What's the greatest success? What do you think you've done best?
All right, the greatest success, terrific question. I think, at the risk of sounding sort of Pollyannish, is to convince members of the judiciary, principally the leadership, a thing called the Higher Juridical Council, that we can bring to them some good positive things, and we have, not only in terms of the construction, but when we train, for example, use once again the illustration of these 50 judicial investigators who we graduated. You should see the faces of pride and great joy of when all of you graduate in a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, of family members showing up at the Central Criminal Court of Iraq, coming through the red zone to be there when their brother or sister. And yes, there are women in the Iraqi judiciary, and there are women who are judicial investigators. That's a positive thing, obviously. Being able to identify in them, hopefully, some investment of our sense of rightness and, again, due process, procedural, fundamental fairness, those kinds of things, and getting the real sense that they understand it. And that when they do, in fact, have that file in front of them that has a confession that is beaten out of someone, they will respond appropriately and say, this cannot happen. They will get to their chief judge and say, we've got to remedy the situation in this prison. They'll get to us and say, Mr. Santelle, what can we do to shut that place down? When the individual human minds and hearts understand what it is that we are trying to convey over there, that is my paycheck. That is my paycheck.
Very briefly, greatest frustration for you so far?
Greatest frustration is what I mentioned before, the difficulty sometimes of getting out. It is, if I wanted to come to see you, Mike, tomorrow afternoon, I'd call you up and say, gee, I can meet you for half an hour right after lunch, or I can see you tomorrow night. I have to plan for 2 weeks to go in to see the Chief Justice, or I have to plan for a month to have a meeting with judicial investigators, and that morning it may well be that as we're all geared up and ready to go, and I've structured out an agenda and planned within inches of its life our agenda for our discussion, the regional security officer will say, no, there have been bombs going off in Attaché, you are canceled today. And as a result of that, we go back to square one. And everything we plan for that day and the things that we're going to follow from that are postponed by a week, by a month, sometimes even longer. And so not only the difficulty of getting there, but the difficulty in getting things done on anywhere near a timely basis. I have a colleague who says the things that take 3 hours here in the United States take 3 days in Iraq. Things that take 3 days here will sometimes take 3 months because, once again, you're in the midst of this very difficult and tumultuous environment.
And you'll be back how soon?
We'll be back on campus, so to speak, probably on about May 13th or 14th, right around that period of time. The reason I say 13th or 14th, one of the other small frustrations is it does take about 3.5, 4 days literally to get from a Milwaukee or a Washington, D.C. back into the international zone. You are dependent as a civilian on the military to get you in and out in C-130s and helicopters, and plainly, my presence there is a whole lot less important than is the presence of our military forces, who, again, at the risk of sounding Pollyannish, great respect, tremendous respect for not only the soldiers who are there, but generals, colonels who are wrestling with some very, very difficult issues. I know it's easy to put a bumper sticker that says support our troops, and there are an awful lot of people who are cynical about that. But on a daily basis, I eat with soldiers, I talk to the colonels, the generals. These are people who are wrestling, as I've often said, in the gray areas of the existence over there, coming up with imperfect solutions to imperfect questions, and great admiration.
Let's take some questions from all of you. Just raise your hand, and I'll try and repeat it since we're recording this for audio. Go ahead. Yes, please. Now, the question again is, given the rift between Sunni and Shia in Iraq, how do you deal with some of the issues if you have a Sunni judge or a Shia judge, and the feelings of the suspicion that exists there?
Sure. There's no doubt that the issue is ever present. I will tell you, just by way of anecdotal response, that this issue came up the last day that I was there before I came back. We had one of the judges who was hearing a couple of cases out at this Rusafa prison complex, a new courthouse that we built out there, and one of the military people said, well, for purposes of public consumption, we need to ensure that there is a Sunni detainee being prosecuted and a Shia being prosecuted. Let's have a Sunni judge prosecuting the Shia and a Shia prosecuting the Sunni. And we were talking through this with the judge, and he looked at me and he said, Jim, completely wrong, completely wrong. He said, we are, and this is the brightness and this is the modernity of the Iraqi judiciary. how terrible is it for us to perpetuate that notion that if you are a part of the Iraqi judicial system, whether as a witness, a detainee, or a judge, that we are going to label you Sunni, Shia, and therefore we've got to have this complete sense of not just balance, but labeling, if you will. Now, is it there? Is it naive to say that it's not there? Of course it is, and it is a part of this. But he said to me, Jim, I will not be asking this detainee whether you're a Sunni or Shia. I don't want anybody to know that I am a Shia as opposed to a Sunni. My prosecutor is Sunni, my defense attorney is a Shia, and if we're to get anywhere in this country, we need to establish that, whether it's on the camera or some other setting, that the people that we are involved in this system are Iraqis, and I'm not going to identify that for you now. Do we still, is that and I say that once again just because it illustrates, I think, the sense, at least among these very bright and very forward-looking members of the judiciary, a proper way of looking at this still. Is it there? You bet it is. And is there a certain sense in which we wrestle, even in the prisons, the police, with difficulties? As we get Iraqi Corrections Services officers to this new prison site, we are very sensitive to the fact that we've got a group of Sunni Iraqi corrections officers and Shia, and because of the animosities that exist right now, we can't house them together. We're hoping that over time, by training them together, we can have an impact there. So it does permeate a lot of what you do, but it is good to see that among this very bright and very enlightened group of judges, and some in the ministries of Interior and Justice as well, you've got this sense we desperately need to try to ratchet down at least the language on that side of things.
More questions? Yes, sir.
The justice system as it is now, or possibly in the future, capable of deterring civilian terrorist acts?
Is the justice system capable of deterring any of these terrorist acts?
My answer is yes. I think that the very fact that they are being attacked, as horrific as that sounds, indicates that the judges have been identified as a challenge to anarchy. And so when Judge Hamid, who is one of the chief panel judges of the CCCI, imposes a death sentence upon an individual who is a part of a Mosul cell terrorist group in Nineveh province to the north, that gets back. And Judge Hamid, again, not that it's a good reflection on the situation there, Judge Hamid gets death threats as a result of that. Why? Because he has just imposed this horrific sentence upon someone who is responsible probably for the deaths of 50, 100, perhaps more people up there. My sense is that while the numbers are not sufficiently great to address it and the institutions are not there yet, the individual judges can in fact have an impact upon what they're doing. And part of our job, quite candidly, is to ensure that the recidivism to some extent is reduced by publicizing what a Judge Hamid does in that case. One of the other great difficulties is just communication and media in Iraq, and ensuring that when in Baghdad one of these Mosul cell terrorists is in fact convicted and sentenced to death or sentenced to life in prison, people back in Mosul hear about it. And so we work also then with the ministries in trying to accomplish that too.
Mm-hmm. Another question? Yes.
From what I've read, it seems that one of the big problems is the prevalence of the huge conspiracy theory. It seems like everyone in Iraq thinks that America is conspiracy to take down the country. What is your impression of these conspiracy theories, like in the judiciary and both? I mean, how prevalent are they to the citizens in Iraq? Is that a real problem?
The question is, how do the Iraqi citizens feel about these conspiracy theories that really what America is trying to do is sort of destroy their country rather than help it?
Sure. Again, students, scholars of the Middle East will tell me, probably not unlike our own Western sensibilities, that conspiracies are part of the culture, if you will, and that this is nothing new just from the past 3.5, 4 years. Is it out there? Sure. And the limited occasions when I have an opportunity to chat with non-judicial, non-leadership type Iraqis, and they are few and far between, I have to say. It is not the case. It is not the case that I can walk around in some open market in downtown Baghdad and chat with an Iraqi and say, what do you think about this or that? But in those circumstances where we do have a chance to chat with them, I think the answer is that there is a good deal of suspicion about lots of things. And that includes probably the American presence there. Is there a sense that the Americans at some point soon, as the Prime Minister himself has said, needs to leave? Yes, probably so. And will you find those people who will say to you, yes, this is all a conspiracy about oil or about positioning ourselves so we've got air bases to invade Iran, that sort of thing? I'm sure that you can identify those people out there who will say that. For all of those people who will say that, I think there are also those who will tell you that there are an awful lot of good things that we are doing there, and that we can balance those conspiracy theorists against those people who simply take things for what they are, which are people who are trying to do a very, very difficult job in a very difficult circumstance. And that applies to their own country as well. I think there are an awful lot of people who will look to their own government and say, gee, what is Malachi, what is Tariq al-Hashmi really about as the vice president? And that is probably a part of any culture, any political establishment. And yet, when it comes down to the nuts and bolts of daily existence, I think people want what all of us want, which is education for your kids. You want health care. As I've said before, right now it would be wonderful if we can somehow restore power to people, so you can turn on the lights and wash clothes and cook food in Baghdad, those fundamental things. And I think, I say that just because I think it underscores the notion that most Iraqis are not spending huge amounts of time contemplating the latest op-ed piece in the New York Times, but talking about how they can figure out how to make a go of this and how to make their lives better and what the future of their country is.
Mm-hmm. More questions? What are Iraqi law schools like, legal education
absolutely.
like?
You should know that in Iraq, in the civil law Napoleonic code system that we have embraced, a law degree of the sort that you are getting is an undergraduate degree. And so if you want to be a judge, what you need to do is you need to finish up your legal studies, a 4-year degree there is the Baghdad Law School. And there are actually a number of legal colleges in Baghdad that are operating, that are fledgling to be sure, but they are producing graduates. And as I mentioned before, if you want to go on to be a judge, you then practice for a while as a lawyer in the civil or the criminal courts of Baghdad or other cities, and then you apply to become a part of this Judicial Training Institute, and after 2 more years, you then graduate as a judge, and that is your role, that is your mission for the rest of your career. They are operating. We do meet with the deans of the law schools on a regular basis. And again, what can we do there? Well, we can't provide security to the students who are there because they're living in harm's way. But we can provide things as simple as law books. I can facilitate, as we did. One of the deans of the Judicial Training Institute said, Mr. Santelle, I need $7,000 to go to Egypt to buy books for my law library. Can we make that happen? Yeah, we can do that. And so it's a small thing, and we're making that happen. Can we build a classroom that probably is not nearly as electronically sophisticated as this one is, but can we get a place where at least there is some sense of light, can we provide a generator so that lights will remain on during the course of the class? Yes, we can do those kinds of things. In the midst of a great many challenges, those are the things that we can support and we can do. At the same time, we want to make certain that we are not there as Big Brother telling them how to do it. We're not there providing them with oversight in terms of day-to-day, here's how you instruct. They're bright people. They're no less intelligent, no less sophisticated than we are here. The legal system, the law schools, the bar associations which are out there pre-existed our presence there. They were there under Saddam. They will be there long after we are there. How arrogant of us to come in and say that we know better. And so we're very sensitive to that as well. But legal education is alive and well, and we see it all the time.
Mm-hmm. More questions? Yes.
Sharia law currently, and how, we have such a misunderstanding, sure, of Sharia law itself. And then how does what you're trying to bring blend with that?
What is the existence of Sharia law, and how is what you're trying to bring blend with that?
Sure. Great question. It is out there. It exists. The judges from the Supreme Court Justice, the President of the Higher Juridical Council know about it. My own view, which is probably derived from their view as well, is to some extent it is also keeping the lid on, just because there are not sufficient numbers of judges out there to handle all of the domestic disputes and all the other things. And undeniably, this goes back long before we were there. People have gone to their religious leaders to resolve family disputes, land disputes. To the extent that the system works, it works. Now, in a perfect world where we've got a government of courts that are established and known, should it be the case that eventually the Sharia courts are somehow woven into the fabric of the legitimate criminal and civil courts that we're building and we're working on? Yes, they probably should. So there is consistency, and the Iraqis, like we would have here, have the knowledge about a certain process and a certain consistency in the way things are done. But today, the reality is they're out there. The concern, of course, is that that is a truly independent and separate system that in some way is a challenge, if you will, to the present Iraqi judicial system. And one of the ways it's going to be seen most immediately is that in the present Iraqi constitution, there is a fairly important article that contemplates the reestablishment of the federal Supreme Court. That contemplates at least 2 of its members will be members who are skilled, or depending upon your translation, versed in Iraqi Sharia Islamic law. And the very forward-seeking and looking Chief Justice today says, I like those people to be advisors and not voting members, very much appreciating the importance of separating religion from the practice and the execution of law. And yet that will be a part of the challenge. And so in many ways, what you're suggesting is going to come to the fore in the Parliament, probably in the next year or so, as they wrestle with this whole issue of the extent to which religious courts and religious leaders should be a part of the judicial system. Mm-hmm. Very much unresolved issue right now.
So a question up there, yes. Is there a coordination between U.S.-led efforts and non-governmental agency efforts in Iraq?
There are huge numbers of NGOs over there, and they're doing some great work. One of the challenges that they have, even beyond those that I do not, is that because of all the institutional support that comes from a government that puts me at Saddam's palace, now our embassy, and gives me all this ability to move around, they are in many cases in the red zone, and they are living out there under harm's way on a regular basis. The simple answer to your question is yes, we work with them on a regular basis. The ABA is there. There are many, many other organizations, international rule of law groups who are there, women's rights groups, civil rights groups that are there. We try as best we can to coordinate with them. Every so often, candidly, we do discover that, gee, we're stepping on each other's programs, and you're doing that? Oh, I thought I was doing that. But when we find out about it, we always work collaboratively together because we recognize that it is ridiculous to do otherwise. Frankly, in a perfect world, the NGOs and those groups that are over there should be the real answer to this problem, and it probably should not be ultimately the United States government, but the individuals who are affiliated with the ABAs and others of the world who are doing that important work.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a question? Yes.
Yes, as you're kind of revamping the political and judicial system in Iraq, I'm wondering what types of historical lessons, if any, the previous instances in the United States and other Western countries have gone into other lands and established political systems that look like their own. What types of lessons are you considering?
Yeah, the question is about what have we learned from history in terms of what we're doing in Iraq?
Gosh, let's talk in 10 years from now, right? Let's figure out what the historians write. I often say to people, this is one of those few times in my life that I would desperately love to live 6 months down the road. I'd love to be able to sit here in October and look back and be able to say, gee, on April 22nd, April 24th, we didn't appreciate this, and now we do know better. And so I don't know exactly what the lessons are going to be. The thing that Mike and I just talked about before this session today was just this notion, without being at all critical and getting into the larger issue of whether this was a good war, a bad war, a wise war, an unwise thing to go in. It does underscore for me the profound importance of understanding to within inches of our lives what it is we're doing. And Mike and I talked before about the cultural differences that we confront on a daily basis, putting aside all the niceties of trying to create a prison system and a court system and a police system over there. The fundamental differences in the way that we think and we breathe. Not that they're worse, not that they're better, they're just so fundamentally different. And I have to tell you that after having been there for a little over a year, I think I'm now just beginning to get some of that, a little bit of that. It is critically important that whenever we do this again, if we should do this again, and we hope, of course, that we look back and we learn some lessons from this at a minimum before we presume to go into another country and bring our perspectives on Western views, that we understand very, very carefully and thoughtfully the differences that have existed long before we've been there, and that we observe those, and that we non-arrogantly come in and embrace the good things and encourage those and try to eliminate those things that we think, and that Iraqis or other countries know and appreciate themselves are the bad parts about it. That is a real tough thing to do, I know, and especially in a situation where you're coming in under a very dictatorial regime, to ever figure out what that looks like right now. But plainly, we need to do better in the future when it comes to this nation-building type effort.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Given that 6 months or so down the road will be really important, I was just wondering what the troop morale is and just the general military direction right now.
The question is troop morale. What's it like right now, based on your experience?
Sure. I can tell you, based upon the fact that I have 2 or 3 meals a day with soldiers who literally in the cafeteria bring their guns in, and they're the ones who are, with my great admiration and amazement, are going out in the days and nights and trying to preserve peace and security in Baghdad. I think they will say that things are difficult. I think that they will acknowledge that plainly their lives are on the line on a daily basis. That has got to have an impact upon your view about what you're doing on a daily basis. This is not just patrolling in the difficult area of downtown Milwaukee. This is truly knowing that your buddies and your colleagues may not survive. And every night in the trailer that I live in, I am awakened, no complaint there at all, by the military air service helicopters that fly overhead, and they're bringing our soldiers back in off the battlefield, and that's where they're being treated. So it's a very sobering thing. I suspect that the mere fact of war has a tremendous impact, has got to, on soldiers who are going out. I have had conversations, again anecdotally, with many of them who have still said that we can do some good things. I mean, you see the pictures of soldiers with small children giving them candy and that sort of thing. We do some of that stuff too. When we come across the young children, breaks your heart, whose parents are no longer there, and we try to give them some life support along the way. Those kinds of things, I think soldiers would probably tell you on the military side what I'm saying to you on the civilian side, which is you can have some small impacts. You can perhaps improve the life of this family by preserving a particular neighborhood, bring to them some limited support for a limited period of time, and hope that is somehow lasting. Again, my guess is probably a very mixed bag, a certain sense of mission. I know in the end that they count the days before they can come back home to their families.
I'm going to take one more question. Let's go back up there. Mm-hmm. I think the question is twofold. How do you measure progress? How do you define better when we look 6 months out? And how do you heal sectarian divisions that have existed for a very, very long time? I mean, are we expecting, again, too much?
Too much. Great question, great observation implicit in the question. At the risk of sounding as if my expectations are very low, when I say 5 to 6 months down the road, I'm talking about not having incidents like last Wednesday where 171 people are blown up in a couple of bus bombs. I'm talking about having some increases in the level of electricity being provided to the rank and file citizens of Baghdad. I'm talking about rockets not raining in, not just on the international zone, but in other places of government. That may sound like a very low, sort of a low expectation, but truly just ensuring some, I will say, dramatic diminution in the level of violence. I'm not talking at all about saying, gee, in October, Sunnis and Shias and the Shia militias and the Sunni insurgencies and the criminals and the Al-Qaeda and all sorts of other folks who are out there, these 4 or 5 different wars that are going on right now, that everyone will suddenly see the peace and will come around a table and will be willing to sign a peace agreement. I'm talking about just a real sense of providing the security and some basic institutional support for perhaps just Baghdad at this point, so that, as many people I think accurately say, we can bring those groups to the table and accomplish a political resolution of it. No way that in 6 months you're going to undermine or turn back literally the hundreds of years of disaffection between many of these groups, aggravated by the last 3 years. I'm talking about something just as simple as providing the basis for being able to invite them to the table to work on a non-military, non-violent resolution of claims and of concerns. That's frankly the low-level expectation that I would hope to have.
Before we go, I want to pick this up because Jim brought something for us. And you can tell us, I mean, this is part of your experience,
absolutely, you bet.
You didn't go shopping at Brooks Brothers.
I did not, by the way. They would not know what that is. But Mike mentioned before that we'll have some food. I wish desperately that these were from Baghdad. They're not, but they're from Jordan. And knowing that I was coming here, we have some sweets, which actually are very similar to the kinds that you get fed in Iraq. So I hope that during the course of the luncheon period that we'll be able to eat some of those, full of fat and sugar. Some things are universal. And the other thing that I just wanted to give to Mike here, so that he can wear this as a remembrance of today, but also a symbol of our unity back over there. This is a United States Embassy polo shirt there, and we don't know run around in those, but it is one of those things that
it makes me look official.
It
does,
what
it
I'm
does.
doing, yeah. And it's certainly in the grocery stores will be a conversation starter, my guess.
Good.
So
Good.
Comes with my
Thank you
great
very much.
appreciation for being with you today. Thrilled to be here, and what wonderful questions and thoughts you've had here today. Look forward perhaps to chatting with more of you individually right after our program today.
Yeah. I just want to say before we wrap up here, two things. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for attending these newsmaker visits we've had this semester. We hope to have many more in semesters to come, so we do appreciate that. But mostly I want to say thanks to Jim. He's had a very busy schedule since he got back into town, and he heads back to Iraq, and we wish him a safe journey and a safe stay, and we do appreciate your courage and your efforts in Iraq. Thanks, Jim Santelle.
Thank you, Mike. My pleasure. Thank you.